In this quiet moment, as the night gently folds around you, let your heart soften. The world outside has grown still, yet inside, thoughts may still whisper echoes of what was, what could have been, and what may never come again. Tonight, I invite you to let those thoughts drift like clouds across an open sky. This is a story about impermanence, the beautiful, bittersweet truth that everything changes. Every joy, every sorrow, every breath arises and fades, just as waves kiss the shore and then dissolve into silence. In understanding this, peace begins to bloom, not from holding on, but from learning to let go. As you listen, allow the sound of each word to guide you closer to stillness, to acceptance, to the calm that comes when we stop resisting the flow of life. Let go of yesterday. Release tomorrow. Be here, gently breathing, gently aware. For in this moment, you are safe, you are enough, and you are part of the great rhythm of change that connects all things. Stay with me, and together we will explore the lesson of impermanence, a journey toward deep rest, quiet wisdom, and the peace that arises when the heart learns to surrender. Now, close your eyes and let the story begin. Once upon a time, in a small village where the river whispered its endless song to the wind, there lived an old monk named Tenzin, who had long ago withdrawn from the noise of the world. Every morning, before the first light touched the leaves, he would rise, light a single candle, and sit by the window to watch the day awaken. To him, the rising sun was not merely the beginning of another day, but a reminder that everything flows, everything changes, and nothing stays the same. The candle flame would flicker gently, and in that fragile light he saw the essence of impermanence. He remembered his youth, when he had once believed that happiness could be captured and held forever. Back then, he had loved deeply, feared loss, and resisted the passing of time. But life, in its quiet patience, had taught him otherwise. Seasons had come and gone, friends had appeared and disappeared, and the reflection he saw in the river each morning had slowly transformed. Yet rather than sorrow, what he now felt was tenderness, a gentle affection for the truth that all things must fade. The people of the village often came to him for comfort. They brought their worries, their heartbreaks, their grief. Tenzin would listen without interruption, without judgment, and when they finished, he would sometimes smile softly and point to the sky. "Look," he would say, "the clouds that cover the sun will soon drift away, and new ones will form. Your sorrow too will pass. Nothing you hold is meant to stay forever." One evening, as the monk walked along the riverbank, he saw a young woman sitting beneath a willow tree, her face buried in her hands. She was crying quietly, her shoulders trembling with the weight of something she could not name. Tenzin approached her slowly, his steps barely making a sound on the soft earth. "Child," he said gently, "why do you weep?" She looked up, startled, and wiped her tears. "My father passed away last month," she whispered, "and I cannot bear the emptiness. Every time I wake, I expect to see him smiling at me as he used to, but he is gone. How can the world go on when someone I love so much has vanished?" The monk sat beside her in silence. The river shimmered in the dim light, reflecting the first stars of the evening. "When I was young," he said softly, "I too lost someone I loved deeply. I remember standing by the river, just as you are now, asking the same question: how can life continue when love ends? But I have learned something since then. Love does not end. It changes form. It flows like this river. Sometimes it rushes and sings. Sometimes it grows still and deep, but it never disappears. The young woman listened, her tears slowing. "But how do I stop the pain?" she asked. "By not trying to stop it," Tenzin replied. "By letting it move through you, the way the wind moves through the trees. Pain, too, is impermanent. It arises, stays for a while, and fades. When you resist it, it lingers. When you open to it, it begins to dissolve." She looked out at the river, watching how the moonlight played upon its surface. For the first time since her father's passing, she noticed how the water never stopped moving. No matter how many leaves fell upon it, no matter how many stones lay beneath, it continued onward, steady and free. Tenzin smiled as he saw her gaze soften. "The Buddha once said," he continued, "that to understand impermanence is to find peace. When you see that everything changes, you no longer cling so tightly. You learn to love deeply, but without fear. You appreciate the moments you have, knowing they will not last. And when they pass, you bow to them, thankful for their presence." They sat together for a long time, saying nothing, listening only to the river and the gentle rustling of the willow leaves. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from a nearby garden. In that stillness, something within the young woman began to shift, a tiny, delicate understanding that perhaps her grief was not an enemy, but a teacher. Days turned into weeks, and she began visiting the monk often. Each time, he would share small parables about life and change how the lotus blooms, only because it rises from the mud. How the mountain endures not by resisting the wind, but by yielding to it. How the moon waxes and wanes, yet remains whole beneath its shifting light. With every visit, her heart grew a little lighter. She learned to watch the sunsets again, to smile at the laughter of children, to sit by her father's old chair without collapsing into sorrow. And one morning, as she watched the mist lifting from the river, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not because her pain had vanished, but because she had learned that it was part of the same flow that carried her father, herself, and all beings through the endless dance of existence. The monk watched her from a distance, his heart calm and full. He knew she had begun to glimpse the truth that had taken him decades to understand, that peace is not found by escaping change, but by embracing it. He turned his eyes to the mountains in the distance, their peaks kissed by dawn. Even they, ancient and steadfast, were slowly being reshaped by time. Stones crumbled, rivers carved new paths, forests grew and fell and grew again. Nothing was ever still. Nothing was truly lost. Everything simply transformed. As the morning bells of the temple echoed faintly across the valley, Tenzin whispered a silent blessing to the world, to the lovers parting, the parents mourning, the children laughing, the leaves falling, and the stars fading into day. All of it, he thought, was sacred. All of it, transient. And in that impermanence lay the beauty of being alive. For what meaning would love have if it were not fleeting? What tenderness would a sunrise hold if it were eternal? It is precisely because everything ends that everything matters. As he walked back to his hut, the candle still burning in his window, he felt an ease that words could not describe. The young woman, too, felt that ease growing in her heart, like the slow unfolding of dawn. She no longer sought to hold on. She simply lived, breathed, and let each moment come and go, knowing that in every ending there was also a beginning waiting to be seen. And thus, beneath the quiet stars, the lesson of impermanence continued, not as sorrow, but as the soft hum of life itself, teaching all who would listen that to let go is not to lose, but to finally be free. As days passed, the young woman continued to visit Tenzin at the riverbank, where the water's murmur became a part of her healing. The monk never lectured or tried to teach her in the way scholars do. Instead, he spoke through silence, through the rhythm of his breath, and through stories that seemed to arise naturally from the wind, the trees, or the drifting petals that floated past them on the water's surface. One morning, as dawn spread its pale light over the mountains, she found Tenzin sweeping fallen leaves from the temple courtyard. The soft swish of the broom was steady, almost musical. She stood watching for a while before asking, "Master, why do you sweep the leaves every day when more fall the next morning?" He smiled, his eyes creased like folds in silk. "Because each morning brings new leaves," he said. "It is not the clean ground I seek, but the practice of meeting change with gentleness." The woman pondered this quietly, realizing that perhaps peace was not about keeping things as they are, but about flowing with what comes. As they worked side by side, she noticed the breeze lifting strands of her hair, the sunlight glinting briefly on a puddle, and the scent of rain lingering from the night before. All these tiny, fleeting sensations filled her heart with a strange tenderness. She had spent so long fearing the passing of moments, but now she was beginning to see that their passing was what made them precious. When they finished sweeping, Tenzin led her to a wooden bench beneath a fig tree. "The Buddha once told a story," he said softly, "about a monk who spent his whole life trying to preserve a single flower. He built walls around it, shaded it from the wind, and watered it carefully. But no matter how he tried, the flower withered and died, as all flowers do. Only when he stopped clinging and began to notice the field beyond the many blossoms that came and went, did he understand the meaning of impermanence. It is not loss that pains us, but our refusal to accept the flow." She nodded slowly, her eyes lowered. "But Master," she asked, "if everything changes, how can love remain true? How can we care without holding on?" Tenzin looked out over the horizon, where the sky was turning gold. "To love in the light of impermanence," he said, "is to love freely, without ownership. It is to know that the one you cherish is like the morning dew, beautiful, delicate and fleeting, and to be grateful for the moments they are near. When love is born from attachment, it becomes fear. But when love is born from awareness, it becomes compassion." His words sank deep into her heart. She thought of her father, how he had loved her without asking her to become anything other than herself. He had known, perhaps without saying, that his time with her was temporary, and that this made every shared moment infinitely meaningful. That night, as she lay listening to the chirping of crickets and the whisper of wind against the temple eaves, she felt her father's presence not as a wound, but as a quiet warmth that moved through her like breath. The next morning, she told Tenzin about this feeling. "It is not strange," he said gently, "to find comfort in what is unseen. When a candle burns, its flame disappears into the air, but its warmth lingers. Your father's love has simply changed its form. To cling to his body is to cling to smoke. To honor his love is to feel its warmth in every act of kindness you offer the world." Days turned into weeks, and she began to assist the monk with daily chores, fetching water, preparing tea, tending the small garden near the temple steps. One day, she noticed a small bird building its nest in the eaves above the door. Every day, she watched it bring twigs and soft bits of grass, carefully weaving them together. But one afternoon, a sudden storm swept through the valley, and by morning the nest was gone. She felt a pang of sorrow and told Tenzin, "It's so unfair. The bird worked so hard, and now everything is destroyed." The monk smiled faintly. "Do you think the bird will give up?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, it will start again." "Yes," he said, "because the bird knows what we forget, that building and losing, coming and going, are not separate from life. The storm is not the end. It is part of the same rhythm." The woman watched in awe as over the next few days, the bird returned, carrying new twigs, rebuilding its home once more. The sight filled her with quiet wonder. Perhaps peace was not found in keeping things from changing, but in dancing gracefully with the changes. One evening, as they sipped tea by the river, Tenzin spoke again. "Impermanence is not something to fear. It is the pulse of life itself. Think of the river. It never holds onto the water that passes. If it did, it would cease to flow. So it is with us. When we try to hold the past or control the future, our hearts grow stagnant. But when we allow each moment to come and go freely, we remain alive, open, and free." The woman closed her eyes, listening to the flowing water. It seemed to sing to her now, its melody one of surrender and renewal. She realized that the river had been teaching her all along. Even the stones at its bottom, smoothed by time, bore witness to the quiet power of change. That night she dreamed she was standing in the middle of the river, her feet submerged in cool water. She felt no fear as the current moved around her. Instead, she felt carried safe in the understanding that she was part of something vast and eternal. When she told Tenzin of her dream, he nodded. "You have seen the truth in your heart," he said. "Impermanence does not mean you disappear. It means you are always becoming." As the months unfolded, the young woman began to share what she had learned with others. When villagers came to the temple seeking comfort, she would tell them softly, "Nothing is lost, only changed." Her words, once born from pain, now carried a calm conviction. The villagers began calling her May, which meant graceful renewal. Even the children would run to her, asking her to tell them stories by the river. And she would tell them of the candle that flickered and went out, only to light another, of the bird who built again after the storm, of the leaf that fell to nourish the soil so new life could bloom. Through these stories, she reminded the mind herself that everything that ends gives rise to something new. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, Tenzin grew very quiet. He had fallen ill, his body frail and his breath shallow, yet his eyes still shone with that serene light. May sat beside him, holding his hand. "Master," she whispered, "I don't want you to leave." He smiled weakly. "Do you remember what I told you when we met?" he asked, "that everything flows." She replied through tears. "Yes," he said. "And so must I, you see, child. Impermanence is not just a lesson for the living, it is the freedom of all beings. When I am gone, you will find me in the river's song, in the morning wind, in your own breath. Do not cling to the form. Feel the essence." May wept silently, understanding but aching all the same. The next morning, Tenzin's candle burned low, and with a final soft breath, his flame joined the wind. The temple was silent except for the distant hum of the river. May sat there for a long time, feeling the ache of loss and the quiet acceptance beneath it. The world outside continued, birds sang, the sun rose, leaves fell, and she realized that nothing had truly ended. Her teacher had simply changed form once more. As she stepped outside and looked toward the river, she whispered, "Thank you, Master." And for a brief, wondrous moment, the wind stirred and carried the scent of jasmine through the air. It felt like an answer, soft and wordless. From that day on, May continued Tenzin's work, tending the temple, sweeping the leaves, sharing stories of impermanence with anyone who came. Each sunrise reminded her of the truth he had embodied, that peace does not come from holding, but from flowing. And though sorrow would visit her now and then, she welcomed it as an old friend, knowing it too would pass. Life, she understood now, was a continuous movement of meeting and parting, blooming and fading, appearing and dissolving. And in that movement lay the quiet, unshakable grace of existence itself. The seasons continued their slow dance, and the valley that surrounded the small temple began to shift with the quiet rhythm of time. Spring unfolded with the delicate scent of new blossoms. Summer followed with golden light and the laughter of children playing near the river. Autumn painted the trees in crimson and gold, and winter wrapped the world in soft silence. May had now become the keeper of the temple, her once restless heart now steady and calm, attuned to the same pulse that had guided Tenzin. Every morning she would sit by the window just as he had, lighting a single candle, watching the flame flicker and bend to the unseen breath of the world. The villagers often came to her for comfort, just as they had once gone to her teacher, and though she spoke gently, her silence often said more than her words. One day, a traveler from a distant land arrived at the temple. He was a man weighed down by sorrow, his clothes worn and his eyes shadowed by grief. He told May that he had lost his home in a great fire, his possessions reduced to ash, and his family scattered to different lands. He had wandered for months searching for meaning, but found only the emptiness that loss leaves behind. May listened quietly, nodding, letting his pain find air. When he had finished, she poured him a cup of warm tea and said softly, "Do you see how the steam rises from this cup? It dances for a moment in the light and then fades into the air. That is how all things are. They appear, they shine, they vanish. What is important is not that they fade, but that they existed at all." The traveler stared at the tea, watching the tendrils of steam curl upward and dissolve. Something in his chest loosened, though he did not yet have words for it. May continued, "When I lost my teacher, I felt as if a part of me had been taken away. But in time, I realized he had not vanished. He had returned to the great rhythm, the same rhythm that carries the seasons, that brings dawn after night, that breathes through all of us. You and I are part of that same flow. Nothing you have loved is truly gone." The traveler looked up, tears glistening in his tired eyes. "But how do I begin again?" he asked. May smiled gently. "You already have," she said. "By coming here, by taking this breath, by speaking these words, you are already becoming something new." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, May led the traveler to the riverbank. They sat in silence, listening to the water's song. A leaf floated by, spinning softly in the current, and May pointed to it. "That leaf," she said, "was once part of a great tree. It lived, it gave shade, it turned sunlight into life. Now it travels freely, no longer bound to its branch. Do you think it is less alive now? No, it is still part of the same great circle. So it is with us." The traveler followed the leaf with his eyes until it disappeared around a bend. For the first time since the fire, he felt a quietness inside him, not the silence of despair, but of acceptance. Over the next few days, he helped May tend the garden, fetching water, pruning the small shrubs, and repairing the fence that the winter winds had worn down. He began to smile again, softly at first, then more easily. May noticed how he lingered by the flowers, touching the petals with reverence, as if recognizing their brief yet profound beauty. One morning, he turned to her and said, "When I first came here, I thought life had taken everything from me. But now I see that life is not cruel, it is simply always moving. I was clinging to the ashes, but now I see that even ashes nourish the earth." May nodded. "You have learned the heart of the teaching. Impermanence is not the end, is the beginning of compassion. When we understand that everything changes, we stop trying to own or control the world. We begin to care for it more deeply, because we know each moment is a gift." Months later, when the traveler left the temple, he bowed deeply to May. "Thank you," he said. "You have given me peace." She smiled. "No," she replied. "You found it yourself. Peace is not given. It arises when the heart accepts the truth." After he departed, May watched his figure fade along the winding path, her heart filled with quiet gratitude. She had once come to Tenzin seeking comfort, and now she had become the comfort for others. The flow continued, unchanged yet ever new. That night, as she walked through the temple courtyard, she stopped to gaze at the moon reflected in a puddle from an earlier rain. A breeze passed, rippling the surface, scattering the reflection into shimmering fragments. But when the wind stilled, the moon reappeared, whole and undisturbed. She smiled softly, whispering to the night, "This is how the heart heals." As years went by, May grew older. Her hair turned silver, her hands carried the softness of age, and yet her eyes shone with the same tranquil light that once belonged to her teacher. Time, she had learned, does not take, it transforms. The temple changed too. Children she had once told stories to had grown into adults who now brought their own children to listen. Generations passed, and though faces came and went, the teachings remained like the steady hum of the river. One autumn evening, a little boy asked her, "Auntie May, will you live forever?" She chuckled softly and placed a hand on his small shoulder. "No, child. Nothing lives forever. But that is what makes everything so beautiful. Because we do not stay, we learn to love deeply, to be kind, to forgive quickly." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "But I don't want you to go." May smiled, her eyes glimmering in the lantern light. "Then love me now, while I am here. That is enough." As the boy hugged her tightly, she felt tears rise in her eyes, not of sadness, but of tender joy. For she knew that even when she was gone, her words, her laughter, her kindness would ripple through the lives she had touched, just as Tenzin's had through hers. That night, sitting alone in her room, she looked around at the simple things, the candle, the worn books, the cup her teacher once drank from, and realized that nothing she had ever lost had truly disappeared. It had all become part of her, woven into her breath, her memories, her being. The sound of rain began to fall softly outside, and she closed her eyes, listening. Each drop was a moment, passing and renewing, touching the earth only to rise again as mist. She thought of Tenzin, of her father, of the traveler, and of the countless lives beyond her knowing, all flowing in this same great circle. Her heart swelled with gratitude. The lesson of impermanence was no longer a teaching she had to remember, it was the very rhythm of her existence. And as the candle flame flickered beside her, she whispered into the night, "All things arise and pass away, yet nothing is truly lost." Then she smiled, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her like the embrace of a familiar friend. As the world continued its endless, gentle turning, as years folded gently into decades, the valley remained, ever changing yet timeless. carrying whispers of those who had walked its winding paths. May's temple had grown into a sanctuary not just of stone and wood, but of memory and stillness. Travelers came from distant lands to seek solace there, drawn by tales of the old woman who spoke softly of life's impermanence and whose presence alone seemed to slow the restless beating of one's heart. Though her hair was now white and her movements slow, May carried within her the calmness of a still pond untouched by the wind. Each morning she rose before dawn, lighting her single candle as her teacher once had, offering a bow to the invisible presence of all things transient. The flame flickered as if nodding back, a small reminder that even light itself is but a passing visitor in the darkness. She would sit and watch the horizon fade from grey to gold, feeling gratitude that she had been allowed another morning, another chance to breathe, to love, to let go. One winter day, a young scholar arrived, his mind heavy with questions. He had studied scriptures, memorized sutras, and debated with monks across the country, yet peace continued to elude him. When he met May, he bowed deeply and said, "Teacher, I have learned much of the Buddha's words, yet my heart is restless. I seek the truth of impermanence, but I cannot grasp it." May smiled gently, gesturing for him to sit beside her beneath the old fig tree. "Tell me," she said, "what is it you wish to grasp?" The scholar frowned, uncertain. "I wish to understand how to be free of suffering. I wish to understand why we lose all that we love." May nodded slowly. "You have come here not to understand, but to unlearn," she said. "Impermanence is not something to be grasped. It is something to be felt, lived, accepted. It is the rhythm that underlies every breath. If you chase it with the mind, it will run like water through your fingers. But if you rest within it, it will hold you." The scholar listened, puzzled. How can one rest within something that is always changing? He asked. May looked out over the valley. The wind was moving through the tall grass, bending it gracefully, never breaking it. "Do you see the grass?" she said softly. "It dances with the wind because it does not resist. When the storm comes, it bows. When the sun returns, it rises again. The secret is not to fight the change, but to move with it. The grass does not fear the wind, because it knows that the wind will pass." Her words lingered in the cool air, soft and weighty all at once. The scholar sat in silence, watching the shifting patterns of light on the mountainside, feeling something stir in his chest, small crack in the armor of his intellect, a space where stillness could enter. Days passed, and the scholar began to stay at the temple. He helped with chores, carried water, and listened to the rhythm of the place. There was no urgency there, no striving, only the steady unfolding of moments, one breath after another. One morning, as May and the scholar swept the courtyard together, the handle of his broom snapped in half. He looked at it in frustration, but May merely smiled. "Do you see?" she said. "Even this broom is teaching you. It too has its time. When it breaks, it simply returns to the cycle. Nothing is wasted. Everything returns." The scholar laughed softly, realizing the simple truth in her words. For the first time, he began to see how the teachings of impermanence were not lofty ideas meant only for scriptures. They were everywhere, written in every leaf, every drop of rain, every aging face. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the hills, May told him a story. "Many years ago, before I came here," she began, "I met a man who carved statues of the Buddha. His hands were steady, his eyes filled with devotion. Each time he finished a statue, he would place it in the temple, only to begin carving another. One day I asked him, "Do you not grow sad when your statues crack or fade with time?" He smiled and said, "I carve not to preserve, but to honor the moment of creation." Every statue is a breath of impermanence, reminder that beauty lies in its passing. That man taught me something precious. To live fully is not to resist decay, but to bow to it. The scholar listened, his heart softening with each word. "But why do we still fear loss?" he asked quietly. May turned to him, her gaze tender. "Because we forget that we, too, are part of the same cycle. We want to hold on to others, two things, two moments, as if we ourselves will remain unchanged. But when you truly see that you are the same as the leaf that falls, as the tide that ebbs, then loss becomes less frightening. You realize that everything you love continues in another form. To lose is not to be emptied, it is to be reshaped." In the weeks that followed, the scholar began to meditate by the river each morning. He watched the sunlight shimmer across the surface, the ripples forming and dissolving endlessly. One day, while gazing into the flowing water, tears began to fall without his knowing why. He felt the quiet truth that all his learning, all his searching, had been like trying to hold the river in his hands. In that moment of release, something opened within him. He felt not sorrow, but an infinite tenderness for himself, for the world, for every fleeting thing that ever was. When he returned to the temple, May looked at him and smiled knowingly. "You have seen the river," she said. "Now you can rest." The scholar stayed through the spring and summer, learning not through words but through silence. Sometimes they would sit together for hours without speaking, simply listening to the wind move through the trees, watching shadows drift across the walls. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The scholar rushed to cover the books and offerings, while May stood at the doorway, her eyes soft. "Do not hurry," she said. "Let it rain. The temple has seen 1,000 storms. Each one washes the dust away." Her voice was almost a whisper, yet it carried the strength of deep knowing. When the rain finally stopped, the air smelled of wet earth and renewal. The scholar stepped outside and saw how the world seemed brighter, cleansed. He smiled to himself, understanding that life too must sometimes break open to be made whole again. As the years passed, the scholar eventually departed, bowing to May with eyes full of quiet gratitude. "You have given me the teaching beyond words," he said. She shook her head. "No, my dear. Life gave it to you. I merely pointed." When he was gone, May returned to her solitude, tending the garden, lighting her candle, sweeping her courtyard as always. She knew now that her time was nearing its own gentle twilight. Her breath came slower, her steps softer, yet her heart was lighter than it had ever been. There was no fear, only an immense calm, as though she were a wave, preparing to merge again with the sea. One evening, as she sat by the river, she saw the reflection of the moon trembling upon the water's surface. A dragonfly hovered above it, wings glinting with silver light, before vanishing into the night. May closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "All things arise and pass away," she whispered, "and in their passing, they teach us how to love." She thought of Tenzin, of the travelers, of the children who once laughed beneath the fig tree, and of the scholar who had found peace. They were all threads in the same vast tapestry of impermanence, woven together by time, undone by time, and endlessly remade. The river's song deepened, the stars shimmered above. and the night embraced her in its boundless silence. When the morning came, the villagers found her sitting peacefully beneath the fig tree, her candles still flickering beside her, the flames swaying gently but unbroken. It was said that her face bore a faint smile, as if she were listening to something far beyond sound of song that only those who have made peace with change can hear. They buried her near the river, where the breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the whisper of water never ceased. And as the seasons turned, her story, like her teachers before her, became part of the valley's breath, teaching those who would listen that impermanence is not the end of beauty, but its source. The temple still stands, touched by time yet glowing with quiet grace. Pilgrims continue to visit, lighting candles in her memory, their small flames flickering in the gentle wind. Each flame, each prayer, each breath becomes part of the endless flow, reminding all who come that the truth of life is not permanence but presence. For when we stop clinging, when we allow each moment to pass through us like wind through open hands, we finally taste freedom, the kind that neither time nor death can take away. Many years after May's passing, the temple continued to breathe as it always had, quietly, gently, like a living being resting in the heart of the mountains. The villagers who once came to her for wisdom now brought their children, and those children grew into adults who still came to sit by the river, to listen to the sound of the wind in the fig tree, to feel the same stillness that had cradled countless souls before them. The teachings were no longer just words carved on old scrolls or spoken in low voices. They had become part of the land itself. Every leaf that fell carried her presence. Every ripple in the river sang her lessons back to the sky. Time, in its endless patience, had wrapped the temple in layers of memory. Yet everything remained alive, changing, soft, and full of quiet love. One day, a traveler arrived, weary from his journey, carrying only a small pack and a flute carved from bamboo. His name was Rin, and his eyes, though kind, held the restlessness of someone searching for something he could not name. When he reached the temple gates, he bowed deeply and asked to stay for a night. The monks who now cared for the temple welcomed him, offering warm tea and a mat to rest upon. That evening, after the meal, Rin wandered outside and sat by the river. The moon reflected on the water like a trembling jewel, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine. He lifted his flute to his lips and played a song slow, haunting, filled with longing. The melody rose and fell like breath itself, carrying through the trees and over the quiet rooftops of the temple. The monks paused in their evening prayers, listening, for it felt as though the mountain itself was exhaling through that sound. When Rin finished, he sat still for a long time, tears glistening in his eyes. He did not understand why he wept, only that the music had come from a place inside him that words could never reach. The next morning, one of the monks, an elderly man named Sato, found him sitting by the river again. "You play beautifully," Sato said, settling beside him, "but your song is heavy with sorrow. What burdens your heart?" Rin hesitated before replying. "I have wandered many lands," he said softly. "Everywhere I go, people tell me to seek peace, to let go of attachment, to accept that all things change. But no one tells me how to live with that truth. How can one love deeply and still let go? How can one see the world's beauty knowing it will fade?" The old monk nodded, his eyes reflecting the morning light. "Impermanence is not meant to take away your love," he said. "It deepens it. When you understand that something will not last, you love it more gently, more fully. You stop taking it for granted. You stop demanding that it stay the same. To live with impermanence is to live with gratitude. Rin was silent, turning the monk's words over in his mind. But gratitude feels so small compared to loss, he said finally. When my mother died, I tried to be grateful, but the ache was too great. When I lost my friend in the war, gratitude did not help me sleep. Sato looked out at the river, where a cluster of fallen petals floated past. Gratitude is not meant to erase the ache, he said softly. It is meant to sit beside it. Pain and gratitude can live in the same heart. One reminds you that you have loved. The other reminds you that love was real. The two men sat in silence for a while, listening to the water. Then Sato continued, many years ago. There was a woman who lived here named May. She too once asked how to bear the truth of impermanence. Her teacher told her to listen to the river. She did, and she found peace in its endless song. The river flows because it does not hold on to its water. And so it is with us. When we let go, we continue to flow. That night, Rin could not sleep. He sat beneath the fig tree and listened to the rustle of leaves above him. The air was cool, carrying whispers of those who had come before Tenzin. May, the travelers who had passed through and left fragments of their stories behind. He closed his eyes and heard the river's quiet voice. It spoke without words, telling him of all it had seen. Births, deaths, laughter, tears, every fleeting joy that had dissolved into its current. For the first time, he felt the beauty of that constant movement. He realized that nothing was truly lost. Everything returned to the flow. The next morning, when he played his flute again, the song was different. It was lighter, yet deeper, carrying both sorrow and peace. The monks listened with their eyes closed, some smiling, some quietly weeping. For the melody seemed to awaken something they all carried within them, longing to surrender, to stop fighting the tide of time. Days turned into weeks, and Rin decided to stay at the temple. He helped tend the gardens, carried water from the river, and played his flute each evening at sunset. The villagers would come to listen, sitting on the grass as the sky turned gold and pink. Some said his music made them feel as though they were remembering something they had long forgotten, the sound of their own hearts beating in rhythm with the world. Rin did not try to teach or preach. His music became his way of sharing what he was learning. One day, a little girl approached him after his song. "Why do you play sad music?" she asked innocently. Rin smiled gently. "It's not sad," he said. "It's the sound of things passing. Sometimes passing sounds like sadness, but it's also how life says thank you." The child tilted her head thoughtfully, then smiled and ran off to chase fireflies. Rin watched her go, realizing that even her laughter, like his music, was a fleeting yet sacred gift. As years slipped by, Rin grew older, his hair touched by silver, his hands slower but still graceful on the flute. One evening, as he sat by the river playing his song to the twilight, he noticed that the water seemed higher than usual. The snow from the mountains had begun to melt, and the current was stronger. When the rain came that night, it was heavy and unrelenting. The river swelled, rushing past with a force that shook the earth. By morning, the lower garden of the temple was gone, swept away by the flood. The monks stood in silence, mourning the loss of the fruit trees they had tended for decades. Rin watched the rushing water, his heart heavy. Yet as he looked closer, he noticed something shimmering beneath the surface, the roots of the fig tree, still strong, clinging to the earth. He turned to Sato and said quietly, "Even in destruction, there is life." Sato smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "the river gives and the river takes, and always it continues." When the flood finally subsided, the monks and villagers came together to rebuild. They planted new saplings, rebuilt the walls, and dried the temple's soaked books in the sun. Rin played his flute each day as they worked, the sound lifting their spirits. Over time, flowers began to bloom again along the riverbank. The temple, though changed, was still the same, at its heart a place of quiet renewal. One evening, Sato told Rin, "Do you see? Impermanence is not just about endings. It is also about resilience. When something is lost, something new begins to grow in its place. The river's flow is the story of both sorrow and rebirth." Rin nodded, understanding now, not just with his mind, but with his heart. Years later, when Sato passed away peacefully in his sleep, Rin buried him beneath the fig tree. The monks wept, but Rin smiled through his tears. He played his flute one last time that night, a song filled with gratitude. The sound drifted across the water, and those who heard it said it was as if the river itself was singing along. From that day forward, Rin became the elder of the temple. He taught through music, silence, and presence, never through command. His lessons were simple: listen to the wind, bow to change, love what is before it fades. When his own final days came, he sat beneath the fig tree as May once had, the river beside him whispering the same eternal tune. He closed his eyes and breathed softly, his flute resting in his lap. And when he was gone, the monks found him smiling, as if hearing a melody too beautiful for words. The flute remained by the river, untouched. The wind sometimes passed through. It's hollow and made a faint sound, like a sigh or a blessing. Travelers who came to the temple would pause when they heard it, feeling something stir in their hearts. They did not know whose song it was, nor when it began, but they knew what it meant: that all things arise and fade, and in that rhythm lies the quiet truth of peace. The river flowed on, carrying with it the echoes of Tenzin's wisdom, May's compassion, Sato's patience, and Rin's song. And in its endless motion, life continued, forever changing, forever whole, forever teaching that to live fully is to love, to lose, and to begin again. Centuries passed, like petals falling into an infinite stream, and the small temple by the river remained, though everything around it had changed. The village grew, faded, and grew again, generations rising and dissolving like waves returning to the sea. Travelers still came, not knowing exactly why, drawn by a quiet feeling that the air itself was sacred, that something unseen but deeply alive lingered in the rhythm of the place. The fig tree that once shaded May and Rin had grown vast and ancient, its roots gripping the soil like a guardian of memory, its branches whispering stories to the wind. No one could say how old it was, or how long it would last, but every visitor who sat beneath it felt the same gentle stillness that had filled the hearts of those before them. In time, a young woman named Iko came to the temple. She was a painter who had lost her inspiration. Once her art had flowed effortlessly, capturing the light, the seasons, the laughter of life. But after her mother's passing, every stroke of her brush felt heavy. She said that colors no longer spoke to her, that the world had turned gray. Hoping to find peace, she journeyed through the mountains until she reached the temple at dusk. The monks welcomed her kindly, offering her tea and a place to rest. That night, as she sat by the window, listening to the river's soft murmur, she felt something stir in her heart, a faint warmth, like a memory returning. She could not explain it, only that it felt familiar, as though the silence itself was alive and breathing with her. The next morning, she wandered through the temple grounds. The air smelled of cedar and rain. She found the fig tree and sat beneath it, sketchbook in hand, though her pages remained blank. As she traced her fingers over the paper, an old monk named Haru approached quietly. He was small and frail, but his eyes carried the kind of peace that only time and surrender could give. "You were searching for something," he said gently, "but perhaps you were looking too hard." Aiko looked up, startled. "I used to paint," she said, "but since my mother died, I can no longer see beauty. Everything feels empty." The monk nodded, sitting beside her. "When we lose someone we love, the world changes shape. But perhaps it is not beauty that has vanished. It is the way you are seeing." He picked up a fallen leaf and held it between his fingers. Its edges were curled and brown, yet the veins still glimmered faintly with gold. "Look at this leaf," he said. "It has already lived its purpose. It fell, it will crumble, and it will feed the earth so that more trees may grow. Is that not beautiful?" Aiko studied the leaf for a long time. It was fragile, imperfect, and yet it held a strange grace. For the first time in months, her eyes softened. "But how do I paint what always changes?" she asked. Haru smiled. "You do not paint to stop the change," he said. "You paint to honor it." From that day on, Aiko began to paint again, slowly at first. She set up her easel by the river, letting the light shift and play upon the water. Her brush moved differently now, less certain, more tender, as if guided by something beyond skill. The monks often stopped to watch her work. Her paintings were no longer about perfection or control. They were about the fleetingness of each moment. One day she painted a single candle flame, flickering softly in the dark. When asked why, she said, "Because it reminds me that light is most beautiful when it's about to fade." The villagers began visiting to see her work, and in their eyes, they saw something they could not describe: a serenity, a truth that spoke directly to the heart. Yet Aiko still felt a quiet sadness within her, a longing she could not name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the river glowed with liquid gold, she asked Haru, "Why does peace still feel so close, yet so far away? I can paint again, I can see beauty, but I still miss her." The monk listened, his face calm. "Because love does not disappear," he said. "It simply changes its form. The ache you feel is not a wound, is love continuing without an object. It is love learning to flow without holding." He picked up a pebble and tossed it into the river. "Watch how the ripples move. Your mother is like that pebble. Her presence may have left your sight, but her touch continues to ripple through you. Each painting you make, each breath you take, carries her forward." Tears filled Aiko's eyes, but they did not fall. Instead, she smiled faintly, feeling something soften deep within her chest. That night, she dreamed she was standing in the river, surrounded by light. The water carried thousands of shimmering reflections, faces, memories, moments, and as she reached out, they all dissolved into pure radiance. She awoke with tears on her cheeks, but her heart was calm. In the days that followed, her art deepened. She painted not what she saw, but what she felt, the transient glow of dusk, the stillness after rain, the bittersweet ache of love remembered. Her paintings began to attract pilgrims from distant places. They said her art made them feel as though time had slowed, as though they were seeing life itself breathe. Aiko never sought fame. She simply painted as prayer. Each brushstroke became a meditation on impermanence. One day, she painted the old fig tree. It had begun to wither, its roots exposed, its branches thin. The monks worried it might not survive another winter. When they saw her painting, some were saddened, but Aiko only smiled. "Even in dying, it is alive," she said. "The beauty is not in how long it lives, but in how deeply it is part of everything around it." When the tree finally fell one autumn night during a storm, the monks and villagers gathered at dawn. They stood in silence, mourning the tree that had watched over generations. Aiko knelt by its trunk and placed her hand on the rough bark. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the shade, for the stories, for the stillness." Then she took her brush and painted the fallen tree as it lay among the leaves, light breaking through the clouds above. That painting became her most cherished work. She called it Return. When asked what the title meant, she said, "Because everything that falls returns to where it came from. The tree will feed the soil will grow new life, and I will paint again when the saplings rise. Nothing is lost." Winter came, wrapping the valley in quiet snow. Aiko spent her days in silence, painting the soft whiteness that covered the world. Her art had become a way of seeing not just impermanence, but peace within it. The monks often said that her paintings were like mirrors for the soul. They did not tell stories, but reflected the truth of the viewer's own heart. One evening, as snow began to fall outside her window, Haru came to her room. He was old now, his breath shallow. "Aiko," he said softly, "you have painted impermanence so beautifully, but do not forget to live it." She looked puzzled. "Live it?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, do not let your art become your refuge. Step into the flow itself. The snow falls not to be admired, but to melt." Those words stayed with her long after Haru had passed away. That spring, she left the temple for a time, traveling to the nearby villages, teaching children how to paint the world not as it is, but as it feels. She told them that every color was temporary, every brushstroke a breath, every mistake a chance to begin again. And when she finally returned to the temple years later, she was no longer searching for meaning. She had become part of it. Her hair was streaked with gray, her hands delicate from years of work, but her eyes shone with the same light that once glowed in the candle she had painted long ago. One evening, as she stood by the river at sunset, she noticed small saplings sprouting near the place where the fig tree had once stood. Their leaves trembled in the golden light, and she smiled, realizing that the world was still painting itself, always changing, always becoming, always returning. She took her brush and painted the saplings, each stroke a quiet prayer of gratitude. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you for teaching me to see." That night, the monks found her asleep beside her canvas, her face peaceful, her hands still resting on her brush. The painting glowed softly in the candlelight, as though alive, and when they looked closely, they swore the river in her painting was moving, shimmering with life, carrying reflections of all who had come before Tenzin, Mei, Rin, Haru. And now, Aiko, the monks placed her painting in the temple, where it hung for generations. Travelers would come to stand before it, feeling an inexplicable calm. Some said they could hear the sound of flowing water when they closed their eyes. Others said the air around the painting felt warmer, as if filled with breath. The truth, perhaps, was that the spirit of impermanence itself lived within a tar reminder that everything born of love continues, not in permanence, but in transformation. And so the temple endured, not untouched by time, but shaped by it, a living testament to the gentle truth that all things arise, fade, and return, and that in their passing lies the most tender form of eternity. The centuries continued to unfold like breaths drawn and released by the earth itself. And though the temple by the river aged, it never truly grew old. Time left its marks, gently on the stones worn smooth by countless feet, on the bells whose tones had softened with the wind, and on the walls that carried faint stains from rain and incense smoke. Yet through it all, a stillness endured, a quiet knowing that echoed the truth of every teaching spoken beneath its roof. The fig tree that had once fallen had long since returned to the soil, and in its place grew a grove of trees, each one tall and strong, their roots intertwined as if holding hands beneath the ground. The river beside them remained the same, yet never the same, flowing endlessly, carrying leaves, petals, and reflections from one season to the next. The temple had become a home not just for monks, but for seekers from many lands, artists, travelers, poets, and wanderers who carried the questions of the heart. They came not seeking answers, but peace, drawn by something they could not name. Among them, one year came a young man named Yori, quiet and thoughtful, with eyes that seemed always to be looking inward. He was a musician who had once performed in grand cities, where his songs filled halls with sound and applause. But fame had brought him little joy, and when his beloved wife died unexpectedly, music itself had become painful. Every note reminded him of her laughter. Every melody seemed to echo her absence. So he left everything behind: the instruments, the stage, the city, and wandered aimlessly until one day he followed the sound of wind chimes up a mountain path and found himself before the temple gates. The monks welcomed him without question, offering food and rest. Yori stayed, drawn by the serenity of the place. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. He helped tend the garden, fetch water from the river, light candles in the hall at dusk. Yet he never sang or played again. His flute remained tucked away in a cloth case by his bed, silent as a forgotten memory. One evening, while sitting by the river watching the sunset bleed into the horizon, he met an elderly monk named Sho. The old man had spent decades at the temple and spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the simplicity of water finding its path. Sho asked Yori softly, "Do you ever miss your music?" Yori hesitated before replying. "Every day," he said, "but to play it feels like betrayal. The songs belonged to her. Without her, the sound feels empty." Sho nodded, gazing at the ripples on the river. "Then perhaps you were not meant to play for her," he said. "Perhaps you were meant to play with her." Yori frowned in confusion. "How can I play with someone who is gone?" Sho smiled faintly. "Is she gone? Or has she only changed form?" He lifted a pebble and dropped it into the water. "You see how the ripples move outward? Each one touches another and another, until the whole surface trembles. Love is like that. The person may vanish, but their touch continues through your breath, your memories, your actions. If you play again, she will move through the notes. The sound will not be empty, will be her voice singing through yours." That night, Yori lay awake, turning those words in his heart. He dreamed of his wife standing by the river, smiling as the moonlight danced on the water. She said nothing, but her eyes seemed to whisper, "Sing." When he awoke before dawn, the world was hushed, the temple still asleep. He walked to the river, sat beneath the grove of fig trees, and took out his flute for the first time in years. The instrument felt cool and familiar in his hands. For a long time he said nothing, only breathing, listening to the rustling of leaves and the soft pulse of the water. Then, slowly, he began to play. The first notes were trembling, uncertain, But as he continued, they grew steady and clear. The melody rose and fell with the rhythm of the river, and within its sound, he felt her presence not as a memory, but as something alive. Tears streamed down his face, yet he smiled. For the first time, grief and love were not separate. They were the same current moving through him. When the sun rose, the monks found him still playing, his music mingling with birdsong and wind. They listened silently, for it felt as if the mountains themselves were breathing through the tune. From that morning onward, Yori played each day at dawn, not for others but for the world itself. Villagers would sometimes gather near the river to listen, closing their eyes and letting the sound carry them into stillness. One woman once said, when he plays, it feels as though time forgets to move. Yori smiled when he heard this, for he too had learned to forget time. The past, present, and future no longer felt separate. Everything was simply the unfolding of one endless song as seasons passed. Yori's hair turned silver, his face lined like the bark of the fig trees. Yet his spirit was light. One evening, as he played his flute under a full moon, he noticed a child standing nearby, listening intently. After the song ended, the boy approached and asked shyly, "Why do you play sad songs if they make you cry?" Yori chuckled softly. "Because sadness and beauty are not enemies," he said. "When we love something deeply, we feel both joy and sorrow, and both are sacred. The tears are part of the song." The boy frowned. "But will you stop crying someday?" Yori looked at the moon's reflection on the water and said, "When the river stops flowing, I will stop crying. Until then, I will let the tears become part of the music." Years went by, and Yori's music became a part of the temple's life. The monks said his melodies were prayers that did not need words. Pilgrims who came seeking peace often found it in the soft sound of his flute carried on the breeze. One winter morning, as snowflakes drifted through the air, Yori fell ill. He grew weaker each day, yet he insisted on walking to the river at dawn. The monks offered to help him, but he smiled and said, "I want to meet the morning by myself. She is waiting there." On the last day of his life, he rose before sunrise, wrapped himself in a warm robe, and carried his flute to the water's edge. The river shimmered under the pale light of dawn. He sat on a smooth rock and began to play one final song. The notes were soft, almost whispers, merging with the murmur of the current. Those who heard it later said it sounded like farewell and homecoming at once. As the last note faded, Yori closed his eyes, the flute resting in his lap. His breath slowed, and like the wind ceasing after a long journey, he became still. When the monks found him, he was smiling, his face serene, his flute still warm from his touch. They buried him beneath the grove of fig trees beside the river, the same place where generations before had found their peace. From that day onward, at dawn, the wind would sometimes pass through the trees and create a faint, melodic sound, soft, like a flute echoing from beyond the veil of time. The villagers said it was Yori greeting the morning, reminding them that love never ends, only changes its form. Years turned to centuries again, and the temple continued to stand, surrounded by the voices of all who had lived and passed through it. Each era left its mark, yet none erased the essence of what had always been there. The sound of the river, the whisper of wind through leaves, the play of light on stone, all of it spoke the same truth. Nothing stays, and that is what makes everything precious. Travelers who arrived weary of the world left lighter, softer, more awake. Some said they could feel an unseen presence guiding them, like a hand resting gently on the shoulder. Others said they dreamed of those who had once lived there, Tenzin lighting his candle, Mei sweeping the leaves, Rin playing his bamboo flute, Aiko painting in the fading light. Though no one could prove such things, everyone agreed that the temple was alive, breathing through every change, every ending, every rebirth in the heart of the temple, beneath the grove that now stretched wide across the hillside. The monks still told the story of impermanence to anyone who came seeking meaning. They spoke of how each life, no matter how brief, was a note in an endless song, how every sorrow carried within it the seed of awakening, how to love fully is to let go gently. And when night fell, they would sit by the river and listen, knowing that the same water touched every shore, carrying memories from past to present, from one life to the next. The river did not mourn what it had carried away, nor cling to what it held. It simply flowed, whole within its own becoming. And so, in the quiet of that sacred valley, the truth of impermanence continued to sing, not as a warning, but as a lullaby for the soul. Those who listened found rest. Those who stayed found peace. Those who left carried its echo with them into the world, a reminder that nothing is lost, only transformed. The temple remained, not untouched by time, but embraced by it, a living witness to the beauty of change and the gentle freedom found in letting go. The mountain valley lay wrapped in quiet mist, and the temple by the river stood as it always had, neither ancient nor new, simply present within the endless turning of time. The river still sang softly to the trees, and the trees answered with rustling leaves that shimmered beneath the morning light. Generations had come and gone, yet something eternal pulsed gently through this place, a rhythm beyond age, beyond memory, beyond name. Those who arrived here seeking peace often could not explain what drew them, only that when they stood by the river, breathing the cool air scented with pine and earth, they felt something unspoken lift from their hearts. Among the travelers who came one spring was a man named Kenji. He had once been a scholar, devoted to study and reason, his mind always chasing the permanence of truth. But the world had wearied him. The more he learned, the less he seemed to understand. He had watched friends age and die, watched cities crumble and rebuild, watched his own reflection change in the mirror until he no longer recognized the man looking back. He had come to the temple hoping to find stillness, but the stillness he discovered was not what he expected. It was not an answer. It was not even comfort. It was simply endless space where everything appeared, lingered, and dissolved again on his first morning. Kenji walked to the river and saw a young novice sweeping the stone steps that led to the water. The boy's movements were unhurried, graceful, as if he and the broom were part of the same breath. When Kenji asked him what he was doing, the boy replied with a smile, "I am helping the leaves return to where they belong." The scholar frowned slightly, unsure how to reply. Later that day, he met an older monk named Jiro, who had been at the temple since childhood. They shared tea by the fig grove, the air fragrant with blossoms. Kenji asked, "Do you believe this place will last forever?" The old monk laughed softly. "Even mountains crumble," he said. "But if you look closely, you'll see that nothing truly ends. When the rock becomes dust, it feeds the soil. When the soil feeds the trees become shade. When shade touches a tired traveler, peace continues." So perhaps forever is not about lasting, it's about continuing to transform. That night, as Kenji lay in his small room listening to the steady hum of the river, he found his thoughts returning to those words. He realized that his whole life he had been chasing permanence, hoping to find something solid in a world that never stopped shifting. Yet here, in the quiet breathing of the temple, impermanence did not feel like a threat. It felt like mercy. The next morning, he joined the monks for their daily chores. He carried buckets of water, tended the small garden, and cleaned the old wooden floor of the meditation hall. Each task was simple, repetitive, and oddly soothing. No one hurried. No one spoke unless necessary. Everything was done with care, as if each gesture, no matter how small, was part of something sacred. Over time, Kenji noticed how even the smallest details changed the way sunlight fell through the paper windows, how the scent of incense shifted from morning to dusk, how the sound of the river deepened after rain. Nothing was static. Nothing was the same from one breath to the next. One afternoon, Jiro invited him to walk deeper into the forest. The air there was cool and damp, and the ground was soft with fallen leaves. After a while, they came to a clearing where a great cedar tree stood, older than any of the monks could remember. Its trunk was enormous, split in places where lightning had once struck it, but it still stood tall, its branches heavy with life. "This tree has seen more seasons than we can count," Jiro said. "It has lost countless leaves, and still it grows. The lightning that scarred it did not destroy it. It became part of its story. The same is true for us. What we call loss is often just the shape of growth we have not yet understood." Kenji ran his fingers along the rough bark, feeling the texture of years carved into its surface. For the first time, he sensed that impermanence was not a force moving against life. It was life itself, endlessly remaking the world. In the days that followed, he began to rise before dawn to watch the river. He noticed how no two mornings were alike. Some were painted in silver mist, others burned with gold. Sometimes the water flowed clear and calm. Other days it churned with rain. He began to feel that the river was teaching him something beyond words, truth that could only be lived. Slowly, he started to let go of his need to name, to define, to hold. He learned to simply watch, breathe, and feel the movement of things passing through him. The more he let go, the lighter he became, until even his thoughts seemed to flow like water through an open gate. One evening, as he sat alone by the riverbank, he met a young woman gathering flowers nearby. Her name was Hannah. She lived in a nearby village and came often to the temple to leave offerings for her late husband, who had died in an accident the year before. When she placed the flowers by the water, she whispered something quietly to the current, and then watched them drift away. Kenji asked what she had said. She smiled softly and replied, "I tell the river to carry my love wherever it flows. That way, he is never far." Her words stayed with him. In them, he heard the same acceptance he had begun to discover within himself, the understanding that love does not end. It transforms, just as water becomes mist, and mist becomes rain, and rain returns to the river again. As spring deepened into summer, Kenji and Hannah often met by the river. They spoke little, sometimes only sitting together, watching the play of light on the water. There was no longing between them, only a shared peace, as if they both understood the connection did not depend on permanence. One evening, she told him that she no longer came to mourn, but to give thanks. He loved the world, she said of her husband. Now I love it for him. Kenji felt something awaken in him, a quiet gratitude for all he had once resisted. He realized that every person he had ever loved, every loss he had ever endured, had shaped him into this moment of stillness. The ache he had carried for so long was not an enemy. It was a companion guiding him toward understanding. Months passed, and autumn arrived with its golden light. The air turned crisp, the leaves flamed with color, and the nights grew long and full of stars. One evening, Jiro fell ill. He called Kenji to his side and said with a weak smile, "It is my time to return." Kenji felt a pang of sorrow, but the old monk's eyes were clear and serene. "Do not be sad," Jiro said. "I have lived as the river lives, flowing, changing, giving. What more could one ask?" He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. "When I am gone, do not look for me in the temple. Look in the water, in the wind, in your own breath. I will be there." Those were his last words. When he passed, the monks wrapped his body in white cloth and carried him to the riverbank. They sang softly as the current took the ashes away. The water shimmered under the moonlight, carrying his essence into the endless sea. After his passing, Kenji spent many days alone by the river, reflecting. He thought about all who would come before Tenzin, Mei, Rin, Aiko, Yuri, and how each had found peace not by escaping impermanence but by resting within it. He realized that the temple was not sacred because it defied time, but because it embodied time. It was a place where birth, loss, love, and death were not separate events, but continuous movements in the same current. The teachings were not in the scriptures or the chants, but in the way the monks poured tea, swept leaves, or smiled at one another after long silence. He saw now that wisdom was not something to be achieved, but remembered from the stillness that exists. Beneath the noise of fear, one dawn, he picked up a small brush and began to write on the wooden railing outside his room. He wrote a single phrase: "All things return." The monks who saw it later left it untouched. They said it captured everything the temple had ever meant. Seasons continued to pass. Hannah grew old, her visits becoming less frequent, until one day she did not return. Kenji did not grieve as he once might have. He simply bowed to the river and whispered, "Thank you for carrying her home," and then he, too, in his own time, became part of the same flow, leaving behind no possessions, no monuments, only a deep peace that seemed to linger in the air long after he was gone. Centuries later, the temple still stands, surrounded by the grove that had grown from the soil of countless lives. The river continues to sing, carrying echoes of laughter, tears, prayers, and silence. Travelers still arrive with heavy hearts and leave lighter, as if something unseen had touched them. They may not know the names of those who came before, but their spirits are felt in every breath of wind, every reflection of moonlight on the water. The truth remains unchanged. Impermanence is not loss, but the gentle hand guiding life toward renewal. To see it, one need only stop clinging, open the heart, and listen to the quiet rhythm of the world as it passes through, ever changing, ever beautiful, ever free. The centuries drifted onward like mist curling over the surface of the river. And though the world beyond the valley had changed beyond recognition, cities of glass rising where forests once stood, roads of steel replacing quiet paths, the temple by the water endured, untouched by the rush of progress. Time, as always, worked its gentle alchemy, reshaping everything while preserving what was essential: stillness, breath, the soft murmur of the river that had sung the same lullaby for 1,000 years. Pilgrims still came, though fewer now. Some were travelers escaping the noise of modern life. Others were seekers weary of chasing permanence in a world built on constant movement. They came not for miracles but for silence, for the kind of truth that cannot be written, only felt. The monks who tended the temple no longer remembered the names of those who came before, yet they carried their presence within them. Tenzin's calm, Mei's compassion, Rin's music, Isio's art, Yori's song, Kenji's stillness, all living echoes within their way of life. Each generation passed the same simple teaching to the next. Everything changes, and that is why everything matters. One winter, a young man named Ryo arrived at the temple. He was a writer, though he had not written for years. The world he lived in was one of constant noise, screens flashing, messages ringing, people rushing without direction. He had grown exhausted from trying to capture meaning in words that always felt too small. When his mother died, grief hollowed him, and the pace of the world became unbearable. So he came to the mountains, following an old rumor about a place where time moved differently. When he reached the temple, he was surprised by its simplicity. It was smaller than he had imagined, wood, stone, and air woven together like breath. The monks received him without question, giving him food and a place to rest. That night, he sat awake, listening to the wind move through the trees. It sounded like a language older than words, something he had once known but forgotten. In the morning, he walked to the river and found an elderly monk meditating near the water. Ryo bowed respectfully and sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. The river gurgled softly between them, reflecting the pale light of dawn. Finally, Ryo said quietly, "I have lost my words." The monk opened his eyes and smiled. "Then perhaps it is time to listen." Ryo frowned, unsure what to say. "I have come here to find peace," he said, "but all I feel is emptiness." The monk nodded. "Peace is not the absence of emptiness," he said. "It is the acceptance of it. You cannot fill what was never meant to be full. You can only let it flow through you." For days, Ryo wandered the temple grounds in silence. He watched the monks move through their daily rituals, the careful sweeping of leaves, the lighting of incense, the silent bow before each meal. There was a rhythm to their lives that reminded him of poetry, though no words were spoken. One afternoon, as he sat under the shade of the fig grove, he noticed a group of novices laughing as they tried to catch falling petals in their hands. Each time they almost caught one, it slipped through their fingers and drifted away. Yet, instead of frustration, they laughed harder, as if the loss itself was a game. Ryo felt something stir inside him, a small, fragile understanding that maybe the beauty of life was not in what we could hold, but in what we could touch briefly before it passed. That evening, the elderly monk whose name was Etsa joined Ryo for tea. "You watch the world too closely," he said kindly. "You are trying to make sense of what was never meant to be captured. The river never stops to explain its song. It simply sings," Ryo sighed. "But how do I live without trying to hold onto things? How do I write if words only fade?" Etsu looked at him with gentle amusement. "Perhaps you do not write to preserve," he said. "Perhaps you write to let go." That night, Ryo dreamed of paper dissolving into water, the ink swirling into shapes that became clouds. When he awoke, he went to the river at dawn and dipped his hand into the current. The water was cold and alive. For a moment, he imagined he could feel every life that had ever touched it, the ashes of the old monks, the petals from Isio's flowers, the echoes of Rin's flute, all flowing together in a vast, endless dance. He felt small, but not insignificant, temporary yet part of something infinite. Days turned to weeks, and Ryo began to write again. Not for others, not for meaning, but for the act itself. His writing became like meditation, each word a breath, each sentence a step deeper into silence. He wrote about the river, the falling leaves, the laughter of children he remembered from years ago, the way his mother used to hum while cooking. He did not try to make sense of it. He simply let it pass through him like the wind, and in doing so, something within him softened. The ache of loss no longer felt like a wound, but a gentle reminder of love that had once filled him. One afternoon, Etsu found him sitting beneath the fig trees, scribbling on a piece of paper. The old monk smiled. "What do you write now?" he asked. Ryo looked up and said, "I am writing about impermanence." Etsu chuckled. "Then you are writing about everything." Ryo laughed softly. "Yes," he said, "everything." They shared tea by the river, and the monk told him a story. "When I was young," Etsu said, "I used to fear death. I thought of it as an end, as a dark wall waiting for me. But then I saw a candle burn down to its final flicker, and in that moment I realized the flame did not vanish. It became light in another form. The warmth lingered, the smoke carried its scent through the room. Death is not the wall. It is the doorway through which life continues to change its face." Ryo listened in silence, feeling the truth of those words sink into him like rain into dry earth. As the seasons shifted, he stayed on at the temple. He helped the monks with their daily tasks, taught children from nearby villages to read, and wrote letters for those who could not. The longer he stayed, the more he understood that impermanence was not something to overcome but to cherish. Every day brought small miracles that only lasted a moment, the call of a bird echoing across the valley, the glint of sunlight on water, the warmth of another's smile. Each was complete in its brevity. One spring morning, the river flooded after days of rain. The monks worked together to move their few belongings to higher ground. Ryo helped, though he found himself stopping often to watch the water surge past. It was powerful, unstoppable, carrying branches, flowers, even small fish swept from their usual paths. When the rain finally stopped, much of the garden was gone. Some of the temple walls were damaged. The monks gathered quietly to survey what was lost. But instead of despair, there was gratitude. "The river has given us new soil," Etsu said. "We will plant again." And so they did. Over the next months, the garden bloomed brighter than before. Ryo saw that loss itself was fertile, that endings fed beginnings in ways the mind could never predict. He began to write about this cycle, not as philosophy, but as lived truth. His words, though simple, carried the warmth of experience, and travelers who came to the temple would often sit beside him as he read aloud. Some cried, some smiled, all were quiet. "Your words make me feel peaceful," one woman said to him. "Why?" Ryo smiled and replied, "Because they are not mine. They belong to everything that has ever passed through me." Years later, when Ryo grew old, he knew his time was near. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, he walked to the river and sat by the same stone where he had first met Etsu. The water was golden with light. He opened his notebook and wrote a final line, "The river remembers." Then he closed it and set it on the ground beside him. The monks found him there at dawn, his face serene, his hands resting gently on his knees. They read his last words and smiled, for they understood. The river did remember it, remembered through the soil, through the air, through every life it had touched. In the centuries that followed, people continued to visit the temple. Some came searching for the wisdom of the monks, others simply drawn by the quiet beauty of the place. Over time, the stories of Tenzin, Meirin, Aiko, Yori, Kenji, and Ryo became woven into one great story, passed down not through books, but through the feeling of the place itself. The temple was no longer just a building, it was a living echo of every heart that had once sought peace beneath its roof. The river still flowed, whispering the same lesson it had always carried. Nothing is permanent, yet nothing is lost. Every sound, every breath, every life dissolves into the same song, eternal in its impermanence. And so the temple endures, though it is never the same. The river endures, though no drop remains. The world endures, though everything within it changes. Those who walk along the riverbank today may not know the names of those who came before, but if they listen closely, they might hear it the faint murmur of a flute, the brush of a broom, the laughter of a child, the soft turning of pages. The wind carries it all, weaving past into present, reminding each soul that to live is to let go, and to let go is to be free. The temple stood quietly beneath the golden light of another dawn, its walls breathing with the weight of centuries and the tenderness of silence. The air was filled with the scent of rain that had passed in the night, and the river glimmered beneath a sky so vast it seemed to contain every life that had ever been. The valley had changed many times since the first candle was lit in the old wooden hall, yet somehow the essence of the place remained untouched. The same wind moved through the trees, the same water whispered against stone, the same stillness gathered at dusk when the first stars appeared. Travelers who came no longer spoke the same language as those who had come before, but their hearts carried the same longing, the quiet ache to understand what it means to live and to let go. They would arrive burdened by the noise of the modern world, the endless rushing of days that left no room to breathe. And after a time here, something within them would soften. They would begin to notice small things again, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, the way light shifted through the paper windows, the way silence seemed to hum like music. Slowly, they would remember what they had forgotten, that peace does not come from controlling life, but from surrendering to its rhythm. Among those who came was a woman named Aya. She was a photographer who had spent her life capturing moments, always searching for beauty that could be framed, frozen, held. Her work had brought her recognition, but also exhaustion. For years, she had tried to stop time, to preserve what she feared to lose. When her father passed away suddenly, she felt as if everything she loved was slipping beyond her reach. The camera no longer brought her comfort. Every photograph seemed to mock her, each one a reminder of what could never return. She came to the temple without knowing why, only that something inside her was calling for stillness. On her first morning there, she wandered through the gardens, her camera hanging loosely by her side. The light was soft, touching the dew on the grass. She raised the camera instinctively, but before she could take a picture, she noticed a monk sweeping leaves nearby. His movements were slow, deliberate, unhurried. Each stroke of the broom was a quiet offering. She lowered her camera and simply watched. The moment felt alive in a way that no photograph could capture. She stood there for a long time, realizing that the act of watching itself was enough. Later, she met an old monk named Riku, whose eyes seemed to reflect both laughter and sorrow. They shared tea on the veranda, the river murmuring softly below. "You look like someone who is searching," he said with a kind smile. Aya nodded. "I used to believe beauty was something I could hold," she said. "Now it feels like everything I love keeps slipping away." Riku looked out at the horizon, where mist curled over the trees. That is because beauty is movement, he said. It cannot be held, only witnessed. To hold it is to lose it. To watch it is to become part of it. Aya thought about his words that night as she lay awake, listening to the rain. She realized how much of her life had been spent chasing after moments, afraid they would vanish. But maybe vanishing was not the end, maybe it was the truth of things. The next day, she began walking each morning without her camera. She watched the way light touched the river, how shadows moved through the forest, how the petals of the lotus closed each evening only to open again at dawn. Each day was different, yet every day carried the same quiet beauty. The monks taught her how to sit in meditation, how to listen not with the ears but with the whole body. In the stillness, she began to feel the same impermanence she had once feared, each breath arising, lingering, dissolving, like waves upon waves. Slowly, her heart began to trust that there was nothing to lose, because nothing was ever truly separate. One afternoon, Riku led her to an old cedar grove high on the hill behind the temple. The air was cool, filled with the scent of earth and time. "This place," he said softly, "is older than any of us. When I was young, I came here to grieve my wife. I thought I would never find peace again. But one day I realized the forest was breathing with me. Every tree, every bird, every stone carried her memory. That was when I understood love does not end. It changes its form, but it never disappears." Aya closed her eyes, feeling the wind move through the branches. It sounded like a long, slow exhale. She whispered, "Then maybe grief is not something to overcome." "No," Riku said. "It is something to honor. Grief is the echo of love in motion." That evening, Aya took out her camera again, but she no longer used it to capture. Instead, she let it become a way of noticing. She photographed the way mist clung to the rooftops, the ripples on the river after a falling leaf, the smile of a novice as he carried buckets of water from the well. Each picture was a reflection of change, not a refusal of it. When she showed them to Riku, he nodded. "You have learned to see," he said. "Now your images breathe." Aya smiled, though her eyes filled with tears. "It feels like the world is teaching me to let go," she said. "It always has been," he replied. "You just learned to listen." As seasons passed, Aya stayed at the temple longer than she had planned. She helped tend the garden, cooked meals with the monks, and joined them in their evening chants. The rhythm of life became her comfort. There were no deadlines, no rush, only the steady unfolding of each moment. Sometimes, when the monks played the old bamboo flute by the river, she would sit nearby, letting the notes drift through her like wind. The sound carried something she could not name, something eternal within its impermanence. She began to understand that peace was not an escape from change, but an embrace of it. Years later, Aya grew old. Her hair turned silver, her steps slow, but her eyes held the light of someone who had truly seen. She became known as the quiet woman who always carried her camera yet rarely used it. When visitors asked her why, she would smile and say, "Because I no longer need to take the picture to remember it." Her photographs, when she did take them, were soft and simplite upon water, the edge of a leaf, the shadow of a candle flame. Each one carried the same silence that had once filled her heart with fear and now filled it with peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Aya sat by the river where so many before her had found understanding. The water glowed with the colors of dusk rose, amber, and silver melting together. She whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude to her father, to Riku, to the monks, to every moment that had taught her to let go. Then she lifted her camera one final time and took a picture of the river. The next morning, she was gone. The monks found her sitting there, her camera resting in her lap, her face serene. The photograph she had taken was still inside. When they developed it, they found that the image was blurred, almost abstract. The river shimmered like light breaking apart, endless and formless. Some said it looked like clouds, others like the folds of a garment. But those who knew her smiled, for they understood. She had finally captured impermanence itself. The camera was placed in the temple, beside an old bamboo flute and a faded scroll of poetry. Travelers still come to see them, though few understand their meaning. They stand quietly before them, feeling a strange tenderness, as if the objects themselves were breathing. Outside, the river flows as it always has, carrying blossoms, fallen leaves, and reflections of the sky. The temple bells ring softly in the wind, their sound fading and returning like memory. The monks chant their prayers not to hold on to anything, but to honor the continual movement of life. And so the story continues through every leaf, every sound, every breath. The lesson of impermanence remains the same, whispered through time to all who are ready to hear, that nothing is fixed, that change is not to be feared, and that love never dies, it only transforms. To live fully is to bow to this truth, to let each moment pass through like light through open hands, knowing it will return in another form. The temple endures as a living poem written by generations who learned not to cling but to see. Those who visit leave a little lighter, their hearts loosened, their eyes clearer. They walk away understanding that life, in all its fragility, is not something to hold on to, it is something to flow with, to witness, to love deeply and release at night. When the stars shimmer above the valley and the river hums beneath the moon, the air carries a quiet presence, the kind of silence that is full, not empty. It is said that if you listen closely, you can still hear them all, the monk lighting his candle, the young woman painting the dawn, the flute player greeting the morning, the writer watching the rain, the photographer capturing the blur of time. They are not gone. They have only become the wind that moves through the trees, the light that shimmers on the water, the voice that whispers in every heart. Everything changes and everything continues. In that understanding, there is no fear, only peace. The story of the temple by the river is the story of all of us, a reflection of how every heart learns, slowly and tenderly, to make peace with change. Through the passing of generations, from Tenzin's calm wisdom to Mei's compassion, Rin's song, Isio's brush, Yori's melody, Kenji's stillness, Raya's words, and Aya's final photograph, one truth has remained unchanged, that impermanence is not the end of beauty but the very breath that gives it life. Each life, each moment, each sorrow and joy is part of an endless flow, rising, fading, and returning again like the tide. We spend much of our lives trying to hold the world still, fearing the loss of what we love, yet the temple teaches us that nothing is truly lost. Everything that passes becomes something else, a smile remembered, a lesson carried, a light reborn in another form. To live in awareness of impermanence is to live in deep gratitude, for it reminds us to cherish what is here now, the breath in our chest, the warmth of those we love, the soft silence of night. As you listen, as you breathe, let your heart rest in this truth, that you do not need to grasp life to keep it. You only need to be present as it moves through you. Every ending you have faced was also a beginning in disguise. Every goodbye a doorway to a new way of seeing. The temple still stands in the rhythm of time, just as you stand within the rhythm of your own becoming. Let go gently, breathe deeply, and allow peace to find you in the quiet spaces between moments. If this story has brought you calm or reflection tonight, stay with us and continue the journey toward inner stillness. Subscribe to Buddhism for Sleep, where each tale is a soft guide toward peace, a whisper reminding you that everything changes, but love and awareness remain. Let the sound of these stories be your companion as you rest, as you dream, and as you awaken to a life lived gently within the flow. Close your eyes, breathe with the river of time, and let impermanence cradle you into peace.